our CS Leadership Bootcamp. This is our Q1 series. It's got 4 sessions in this series, which means when you signed up for this bootcamp, you're automatically enrolled for each session. Don't worry, you can't join one. It'll be recorded and sent out. Don't worry, a topic's not interesting for you or it's not something that pertains to you. It'll still be emailed to you. Share it with a friend. But this is session 1 of a 4-part series. So today we're going to cover moving from a full stack CSM, introducing specialty roles. Next Tuesday, same time, same place, we're going to talk about launching scaled programs to support one-to-many enablement. On the 20th, we're going to talk about how do you use churn and risk data to drive your new strategy. And then on the 27th, we will conclude with designing a content strategy to help your customers succeed with your solution. So 4 really, really probably important topics, things you're probably all facing right now as we leap into the new year. So we're going to get started. This is great content, great lineup. Hopefully you guys will be able to make it to all 4 parts. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that this is hosted by ClientSuccess. So I am ClientSuccess Chief Customer Officer, again, Kristi Faltorusso. But if you're not familiar with our solution, we are a customer success management platform. So if you are managing a customer success team and you feel like you don't have access to all of the data about your customers through the life cycle of their entire customer journey, everywhere from new to renew, we can help you with that. We'll help you manage your entire customer strategy, operationalize your processes, give you plenty of visibility, and help make sure that your customers are getting the best out of your team. So if you don't have a solution in place and you're interested, please hop over to our website, clientsuccess.com. Request a demo. We'd love to show you our solution. If you have a solution that's not meeting your needs, we'd love to chat with you too. So today's session, we won't be talking about client success. It will just be talking about the strategy. But again, all the things that I'm going to cover, we've got really creative ways on how we use client success at ClientSuccess to solve these problems. So if you're interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out to anyone in our team. Of course, you can reach out to me directly as well. I'd be happy to have a conversation. So let's get started with today's topic. I think we should by now have just about everybody. So thank you again all for joining. My name is Kristi Faltorusso. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at ClientSuccess, and I lead these customer success leadership boot camps. These are free webinar series for anybody in customer success. They are geared towards leaders who are able to implement and make these changes. But I always tell everybody, listen, if you're an aspiring leader, it's just as valuable for you, right? These are things that you'll need to learn. So please, if you've got a team of folks, please feel free to share this with them, invite them to register and sign up. Everything will be posted on our website. Everyone who registers will get this in their inbox. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. Today's topic, moving from full stack CSM and introducing specialty roles. So I got to tell you guys, the theme of the 4 sessions that I've selected for this series is very intentional. These are 4 things that I've been working on since the end of Q4 and things that we're working on deploying in Q1. So if you've not attended my series before, what I can tell you is that all of the things that I cover, all the things that I talk about are things that I've done or am doing firsthand. So you're getting my real life experiences, my knowledge, my failures, and everything that comes with it to make sure that if this is something that makes sense for you and your business, I'm giving you kind of like the how, the why, the what, so you can go put this all into practice. So let's jump in. I've got a big number to share with you all to start. 262,735 people, professionals, were laid off from over 1,000 tech companies in 2023. That is a lot of folks. In fact, I'm sure many of you either know somebody or maybe you were impacted yourself by one of those layoffs. And the reason why I'm sharing this number is because a lot of our companies have been impacted, which means a lot of our teams have been impacted. I'll tell you, leading the customer success team at ClientSuccess, we speak with a lot of our customers, and their teams have all contracted or they've changed, right? They've changed size, they've changed shape, maybe they've changed leadership. And it's important to understand how these changes impact the strategies that we've got in place. Now, I'm sure you guys have all heard we've got to do less with more. And listen, I think to be fair, one, you'll never hear me say that, but to be fair to people that do say that, I think the idea there is that they want to encourage people to think differently and be strategic, right? But the reality of it is a lot of leaders will ultimately just put more work on their CSMs that are still on the team. And if you've been a CSM on a team where you've lost team members, I am sure doubling or tripling your workload has not enabled you to do more. And it sure as heck probably has not enabled you to do better. And so that's what I want to talk about today, because the reality of it is, with less people on our teams, we've got to think more strategically about how we service our customers and how we scale over time. So this is really about that. It's about how do we change the shape of our teams in order to continue to deliver the experiences and the value that our customers expect and quite frankly, they deserve. So I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing here. And so let's just talk through this to make sure we're all on the same page. When I refer to a full stack CSM, I'm talking about a generalist, right? This is the CSM who typically manages the entire customer lifecycle. What I always say is from like new to renew, that entire customer lifecycle, right? You're a generalist. You're managing every single part of that customer's journey. You're their single point of contact. It is that end-to-end ownership, right? You're taking care of that customer relationship. You're responsible for onboarding, satisfaction, and really you're their primary point of contact. So it's that really that single point of contact for that team, that customer who they're working with. And so owning all of that. And when we think about these folks, they have a broad skill set because you have to in order to do all of those things. Now, I will tell you, as a CSM who's been part of a full stack team and part of a specialty team, we'll say like kind of broken up with those specialty roles, I definitely prefer the specialty role model as an individual contributor. And I'll tell you why. While I like to think I'm good at a lot of things, I'm not great at everything. And that's the reality, right? We're expecting individuals who are part of that full stack CSM process to be great at all of those things. Now, some people are better at training enablement, and some people are really good at having commercial conversations, and some people are really great at building relationships, and others are good at a lot of those things. But when you have a full stack CSM role, you are expecting that they have a broad skill set, that they can be really, really good at all of the things in between. So just to note, that's what we're talking about. So when I refer to a full stack CSM, end-to-end ownership, right? Everything in that customer journey is theirs. They are responsible for it. Now, on the other side of this, what we're going to be talking about today is this notion of creating specialty roles. So these specialty roles, they have focused areas. Now, you might be part of an organization or leading a team, or you might be in a specialty role. So let's just talk about this. You're going to have a focused area of concentration. Means maybe you've got a team that manages onboarding and implementation. Maybe you have account managers. Maybe you have customer success managers that are just managing the value delivery in the middle of that customer journey. You've got folks that are managing just the renewals. And I've seen that. I've seen growth teams and just renewal teams. Maybe you have professional services that are layered in there as well. So that's what I'm talking about when I refer to these specialty roles. You have a lot of these focused areas. And what it allows for is deep expertise. So that's point 2 here. Each of those individuals is an expert in that own area of that journey, right? So whether it's onboarding, right? They get to solely focus on onboarding, making sure that customers are properly trained, enabled, that their use of the technology is properly configured, that we are set up to help them independently use the software moving forward. But you have to have that deep expertise in how to orchestrate that effectively. Now, it's also really hard if you've been a CSM in a full stack model. I always say like that context switching. You go from talking to a strategic customer and you're in the middle of a renewal, and then you hop on your next call and you're onboarding somebody in a lower segment, right? Like that context switching is also very difficult. And so being able to have just deep expertise in a focused area allows you to do your best work in that model. And it also provides you with a narrower scope, right? Your responsibilities are super clear. Everything is defined for you, and you have focus on just that specific customer function rather than the entire life cycle. So this is what we're talking about today. We're kind of comparing these two a little bit in the beginning, and then we're going to talk about what it looks like to actually make the change to go from full stack to specialty roles. Lots of words in the blue boxes, guys. Don't even try to read it. I'm going to go through each of these, but I want to make sure that for those of you who are in a full stack model, first, what I want to say is the full stack model works at a specific time in a company's maturation. So don't just think that because I'm covering all the benefits here, that only this model makes sense. There is a time and a place for everything. But what I want to talk about, though, is when you recognize that it is time to make that change, what the benefits could be. So let's start here on the left. The first one is scalability. And the reason why I introduced that big number when we started, right, and we talk about all these companies that are downsizing their teams and how many CS organizations have been impacted, the benefits of this specialty model, it really allows you to scale. It allows you to have specialists who are focused in different areas and ensuring that that function is adequately resourced, right? You can handle the demands efficiently and effectively. The next thing is efficiency. This model is going to allow each person to focus on that specific aspect of the journey and have those streamlined processes and better use of tools and technology that are tailored to ensuring that each of you can do your specific jobs. Expertise, we talked about this. You get to be an expert in a specific area of that journey. So whether it's onboarding and you're an expert in how to onboard those customers effectively, or being a CSM, or someone who's focused on relationship development or commercials, you get to be an expert in just that area. And this leads into that increased focus. Like I said, it's hard to go through that context switching where you're going from working through a customer who's going through onboarding to then working with somebody in a renewal. It allows you to just be focused on delivering the value on the specific tasks and the responsibilities that are part of the remit of your role. And then lastly, here on the left is data-driven decisions. When you break down all of these functions, you have a lot of additional KPIs, right? You've got a lot more data than you probably had before because of the way that you're managing all of this. And so this allows you to actually take a more data-driven approach to how you're managing your customers overall. So the entire data collection across each of these customer journey stages allows you to actually manage your customers a bit better. Now we're going to make our way over to the right. You've got the first one at the top is lifecycle complexity. This is something else to consider. And I will tell you, like, again, I'll give you a big fat, it depends, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you've got a very complex customer lifecycle, right? I've worked with companies where deploying the software could take over a year. And so you're working on 3 to 5 year contracts because deployment is so heavy, right? And so when you've got the complexity that lives there, it makes sense to have specialists. I used to run a team. We had a large enterprise company. You may have heard of them, GE. And I will tell you, we had an entire team who was just dedicated to managing their commercials. And we had to manage their renewal about a year and a half out. So you understand that when you're working with a level of complexity, it requires that level of specialization. Next is role clarity. I can't stress enough, but I'm sure anybody who's been in a full stack role understands that the lack of defined scope of your role makes you kind of a catch-all, right? How many times has someone said, "Oh, we need to get this done. We'll give it to the CSMs." It's really tough when you're full stack because you own all of that life cycle, that there's these little things that need to happen throughout that journey, and they get just put on you, and it sucks. So when you don't have that role clarity of having a defined, scoped role, it creates a lot of ambiguity. So I really love the specialty model because it does introduce that role clarity, and you can kind of say, this is where this role starts and stops. The next one here is customer segmentation, right? You might have customers who operate very differently. And if you've done a great job of segmenting your customers, and when I say that, I'm referring to not just segmenting your customers by ARR. I know so many companies do it. I get it. It's easy. It's not the right way. So let's just all be on the same page about that. But if you've got levels of customer segmentation that really differ, you've got to be able to meet their needs and the needs of your business differently. And so I love the specialty roles because it does introduce the ability to be a bit more flexible and to really meet your customers based on those segments, right? Like where they are and what they need from the partnership, as well as what is the investment you're willing to make. The next one here is that adaptation of industry changes. We get this, guys. Customer landscape changes. It evolves. Our industries, they change, they shift. New competitors pop up. AI, I'll just say that, right? Everything changes. And so when you're in a specialty model, it actually allows you to be a bit more agile and adjust than when you're in a full stack role. It's a lot harder, right? Because you are managing so many different pieces that when there are those shifts, it really is a lot difficult, right? It's more like moving a boulder than kicking a pebble. And then lastly is the resource allocation. When you have the ability to break things down into that specialty model, you can allocate resource a bit more strategically, right? You understand kind of the inputs and outputs that allow you to staff accordingly. When you've got CSMs who are managing as full stack, it's really hard because their book is probably composed of customers that are in onboarding, they're in renewal. Some of their customers are at risk, and so they require a lot more handholding. They've got customers with different needs, different segments. And so it's just the resource allocation, the modeling of that becomes a lot easier when you're in this specialty model. So again, what I wanted to just stress that is that these are some of the benefits of it. It does not mean by any means that this is the end all be all and the only way to do this. Because like I said, most organizations, especially if we're talking like seed funded Series A organizations, you're just building out your customer success team. Guess what? You're probably not hiring an onboarding manager and a renewal specialist and an account manager. You've got somebody who likely was in a technical support role who is now going to step up and be that first CSM in your company. And in that case, guess what? You probably don't have hundreds of thousands of customers, and being that full stack CSM makes sense at that moment. And so that's why I always say, if anybody's ever attended these boot camps, if anyone's like followed me on LinkedIn, I love to say it depends, because it does. There is no right or wrong way to do things. It really does depend on your business, on your customers, on your product, on your market. I can list off 20 different data points that we should all be analyzing to determine what's appropriate when. So we're going to cover this, but just remember, there is a time and a place for all of these things. So it definitely depends. So now we're going to get into making the shift, right? So like I said, at ClientSuccess, I've been going through this process of making some changes to my team. I think for a lot of us, we can all agree that 2023 wasn't our breakout year, maybe unless you were in, like, I think security killed it. But I think for a lot of us, our other industries, maybe 2023 was a tough year. And so we probably weren't growing our teams as we would have liked. So that said, we've got to make some of these changes, these shifts. And one of the changes that you might likely be considering is moving to a specialty model. If I only have 3 people on my team, am I using them the best way possible if I just have them all operating as CSMs? Maybe not. Right? Should we rethink our customer segmentation, rethink our journey, rethink our content strategy? So this is what I've been going through, is really racking my head around what is the best model for my customers and to support my team and everyone that's working with us. So breaking this out into 7 steps is how I approached it. So what I wanted to do is just introduce these 7 steps, and then I'm going to walk you through each one of them and how I went as far as making the shift and starting to drive the change in our own organization, and how you can consider doing this your own. I apologize if I'm a little nasally, I have a cold. So starting with the first one here, customer journey mapping. So if you don't have your customer journey mapped, it's going to be a challenge for you to make this shift. So I always say start from the beginning. And guys, this should be always your first place to start. Please make sure that you have something mapped out that emulates a customer journey. And I don't care if it's 5 steps or 12 stages or 2 stages, it does not matter. But you have to have an understanding of how your customers start and end with a partnership, right? And so I always say it's like how a bill becomes a law. You have to have that really well defined. The next thing is you're going to have to understand how your customers are segmented. And this exercise might actually be a really great opportunity to re-segment your customers. Just because you've had your customers segmented a certain way for a period of time does not mean that that is the best way as we move into the future or as we make this change in the model, right? So, but you do have to have segmentation created for your customers. The next thing we're going to talk about is resource allocation, how you staff this, right? It's gonna require people. And so you have to make the assessment. Do we have enough of the right people, or do we need to consider hiring or augmenting our team? You're going to have to reflect on your tools and technology. Now, I will tell you something. I mean, even though I work for ClientSuccess, I want everyone to have a CSP. It's not required, right? Like, you could probably do a lot with a little or what you have. And so don't feel like if you don't have access to the latest and greatest technology all the time, that it's prohibitive. Obviously, platforms like ClientSuccess make these things 10 times easier. But we also know that if you're making this change, it might be because your budget's cut and you don't have the means to do certain things. So we want to assess what tools and technology you have to facilitate this process. Next, you're going to talk about and look at skills assessment. When you have folks on your team, it's easy to just try to say, okay, Mary, you're going to do onboarding, and Bob, you're going to do renewals, and Beth, you're going to do everything in between. But it's really important that we start to assess, do they have the right skills to do those things? And sometimes this requires having tough conversations, and we're going to talk through that. Next, you have to focus on collaboration and communication. So obviously, this doesn't just impact your organization. It impacts everybody. It impacts marketing and sales and product and every part of your business. So it's important that as you're making these changes, you collaborate with all of your cross-functional teams and you start to manage those communications. Lastly, I always recommend a pilot program. Starting and testing is really important. Now, is that required? No. Could I have said you can do this in 6 steps? Yes, but I'm going to go as far as saying it's a 6+1. You should try to pilot this out because it's easier to test it in a small scale and say, okay, great, this works, or no, it doesn't work, or here's some things we can modify. Then when you roll this out to your entire customer base and your team and you make all these changes, only for it to fail miserably. So learn from me. I fail all the time. Do a pilot program. Anytime you're rolling something out, test it. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to dive into all 7 of these steps. I'm going to talk to you about kind of the thought process around how to make these changes, what I considered, and how you can consider marching forward in this direction. So let's start with your customer journey mapping. It's really critical that you map out your entire customer journey. Now, I'm talking from, I personally like to think about the journey starting even before onboarding, and that's only because so much of the discovery and expectation setting actually starts with sales. And so when I talk about this, I'm not talking about the customer lifecycle, like, oh, when they came to your website and they filled out a form. I'm not going that far. That's not how crazy I need to go here. But what I am saying is the first things that are going to help you understand who this customer is, how they are defining value from the partnership, and then how you're going to effectively manage them all the way through their renewal and beyond. That's the journey that I'm referring to. Now, you don't have to consider what happens in sales. It might just start day one when that contract is closed and you see it in your CRM or your CSP. Great, we have a new customer. Maybe that's day one for you, and that's fine too. But everything that happens to your customer from day one and beyond needs to be mapped out. Now, I'm not talking about every single interaction. I'm not talking about every single call you have with them, but the general motions of what happens throughout that customer lifecycle has to be defined. And I tell you that because we can't start putting people into specialty roles if we don't even have the stages of that journey mapped out. How can I move somebody into onboarding if I don't even have an onboarding stage in my journey that's clearly defined where I know how to operationalize it? Or if I don't have a plan around how we're managing our renewals or our growth, how could I have somebody who's there managing the commercials? This is literally step 1. Now, I will tell you, if you are a CS leader or you're on a CS team and you don't have this done, regardless if you're working on this model, moving from full stack to a specialty role, you should just be working on a customer lifecycle. Please go make that something that you're working on, you're prioritizing for 2024. Next, you do have to identify those key touch points. This is going to be really critical because these are the points in time where you're interacting and engaging with your customers. And this is where you're going to be able to understand, do we need specialized attention here? Now, onboarding is obviously an easy one. I love the idea of having someone specialized in onboarding because I think so much can go right and so much can go wrong in onboarding. And when you've got folks who are just managing a million different things in the full stack model, it is really tough to just focus on delivering and meeting your customers' expectations through onboarding. Don't forget, customer onboarding requires change management, and there's a lot that goes on there. So anyway, this isn't an onboarding training that we have a webinar on that. You can go look it up if you need. But really, again, here, I want to make sure that not only have we mapped out the journey, it's not just about the stages, it's all of the things that happen in each of those stages to help your customer advance through that life cycle. So that's step 1. If you have not done this, making any additional changes is going to be really difficult. So I'm going to ask you, please start with your customer journey mapping. The next one here is your customer segmentation. Now, I mentioned earlier when I was kind of talking through those 7 points, hopefully you're not only segmenting your customers by ARR. Especially if you're an organization where you are hopefully working to grow your customers, you might be missing out on prioritizing customers who have potential growth, or who have different needs, or who are looking to get different value, or who have different ideas of what engagement looks like, different expectations for the partnership. There's so many things to consider, whether that be like demographic or firmographic factors that you want to take into consideration here. It can be a little bit about what they spend. Obviously, you want to protect your investments, but segmentation isn't about creating the segments so that your team can just manage your customers. It's about creating shared experiences for your customers, right? Customers that look a certain way, or have purchased a certain product, or who have certain value criteria. Maybe we want to group those together because we're going to be able to systematically deliver the same experiences, and it becomes a wash, rinse, repeat. The customer segments should be there to enable you to do repeatable, great work based on what your customers need. So you've got to be able to understand how we're going to characterize these customers in those segments and break them out. You're also going to have to think about segmentation across those specialty roles. So, for example, maybe you've got a cohort of really small customers, or customers in a segment that just don't require as much from you and your team. Now, onboarding might not require an onboarding specialist for that segment. Maybe you're creating a scaled onboarding experience where it's self-help, right? Maybe you've got content and in-app guides and a portal that they can go through. Perhaps that's what you're structuring around that. Now, in other organizations, right, in other segments, you might can say, you know what, for our strategic customers, because they are so large and complex and their deployments are going to be so heavy and they've got tons of products they're integrating, maybe that they have a different experience. It really does depend, and it's important for you to understand who your customers are and what your customers need so you can deliver, right? It's not just about how big they are. It's about how are we going to deliver this stage of the journey effectively to this segment based on who they are and based on what they need. So it's just really important that you start to think about these things, because it does impact the experience that your customers will have through these segments. Please, if you're only segmenting by current ARR or MRR, just rethink that strategy, because you're not characterizing your customers. You're not grouping your customers based on them. You're basing it based on you, right? And that's not going to help them. Now we've got to talk about resource allocation. So this is where I mentioned earlier, you've got a bunch of people who probably are on your team today. And we're going to spend a couple minutes on this because I think this is important. Now, as you're going through that customer journey and you've now segmented out all of your customers, you've got to figure out, well, what about what resources do we need? Where are we looking to inject that specialization? Is it, early? Is it going to be in the onboarding? Listen, you might have a PLG product that is super easy to use and it doesn't require a lot of training enablement, doesn't require a whole heck of a lot of change management, but you've got a lot of conversions that are happening because maybe you've got customers on a certain plan and you want to upgrade them. And so the commercial activities that are happening at the end or closer to the end of their subscription, maybe that's where you want to focus your attention. So it's important to figure out, once you've got that journey mapped and you understand how we're going to deliver those journey stages across your different customer segmentations, what are the resources that we need? Now, I'll tell you, having gone through this exercise, it's not just about the skills that your team has, it's also about the will. And I always say that it's skill and will. Just because somebody can do something doesn't mean they want to do something. So I'd really recommend that you actually, if you're starting to think about this as an option for your team, it's important that you start to have early conversations with the folks who are on your team. See what their career progression looks like. What do they want out of their role? What do they enjoy doing? I did a really fun exercise with my team where I said, tell me what you love about doing you love about your job every day. Tell me what you don't love as much. What do you think that you're really good at? And what do you think you struggle at? Right. And kind of like a little 4-box grid. And I gave them, and they all kind of filled stuff in. And then we had a conversation about it as a team. And it was really interesting because things that I thought my team would certain people on my team really excelled at, even though they did, it wasn't stuff that they enjoyed doing. And so when I think about the folks that are the best at their jobs, it's not just because they're good at it, it's because they're passionate about it, right? They love the work that they get to do. It is a privilege to show up every day and do the work that they're doing. And I'm trying to mirror that. I think it's really important for you to not only say, can this person do this job, but really have that conversation and say, does this person want to do that job? I always say, like, listen, I think people are more effective when change happens with them, not to them. So don't tell your team, okay, great, you're going to go do these things. Are these the types of things that you'd like to do, right? As you think about your career and your growth. And guess what? It's also okay if those things don't match up. If you need somebody to do something on your team and it's not something that they want to do or it's not something that they're really good at, you guys can agree that maybe this isn't a fit. Your business needs now don't align with where they are in their career, right? I'm not saying go fire everybody on your team, but I am saying the conversation is important because people need to be able to feel like they have some control over their career. And so I'm not just harping on this resource allocation slide just to hear myself speak. I really do want to just stress the fact that it is more than just assessing resources. It is really important to just have those conversations. Now, when you think about resourcing, you've got to start to figure out what resources do we actually need, right? How are we staffing this? It might actually require you to augment from the team that you have today. So right now, maybe let's just say I'm going to stick with simple numbers because I'm not a math girly. We've got 5 people on the team, right? And I've decided, listen, I need to have 2 people in onboarding, right? In order for the volume. And again, as you're doing this resource allocation, you can't just be thinking off your top of your head, like, oh yeah, probably need 2, right? That feels good. No, you need to be going back to sales and having conversations and looking at the pipeline and when those deals are going to close. When are they forecasted to come in? You need to understand what that pipeline looks like so you can start to staff. Now, this goes back to my let's talk about that collaboration and the communication that needs to happen, because if you are not having bigger conversations, you are not properly resourcing, right? Also, are we forecasting to look at how many customers we're scheduled to lose this year, right? If we understand what risk looks like and what churn looks like, hopefully your team is forecasting renewals or somebody in your organization is. It's not just about, I think I need this many. When we think about the resources, you really have to do a top-down, bottoms-up analysis of the work and the scope that needs to be done, and you need to understand the cross-functional impact to the staffing models that you're building to determine what are the appropriate resources. Now, this is hard because sometimes, well, this is hard for a multitude of reasons, and we can go into like that modeling in another boot camp. But why I say this is because I know that some of this might be, okay, we only have 3 people on our team, but in order to do this, it turns out we need 5. You can actually have very strategic conversations with your leadership team and make a case to justify this. Sometimes it's difficult to ask for more of the same. But if you have the appropriate conversation and are measuring the right impact and having real discussions around the KPIs and the outcomes that you think you can drive for the business, not just your customers, because now we're having business conversations, you could probably at least go to them and have the conversation, have an open dialogue around staffing augmentation, right? And hiring and budgets and all of those things. But you have to do all this work to go ahead and then actually talk about the data that you'd be able to present. So I just wanted to stay on resource allocation for a few minutes because I do think it is much bigger than just determining how many people you think you need to do the job. Now let's talk about technology and tools. So obviously I work for ClientSuccess. I've got ClientSuccess at my disposal. I feel lucky and blessed every day to have a CSP. If you have a CSP in place and you are not using it to its fullest extent, shame on you, because they really can help you do a lot more, a lot better in your roles. So one of the things that we had to do was go through and not only assess what are the tools that I have, meaning our CSP, but what does my entire tech stack look like? Now, understanding what the work would be required, right? So if I'm breaking out onboarding, now, again, ClientSuccess, I have an onboarding platform. We actually just acquired Status. So it's part of our tech stack. And so I've got that built in. So I can actually have that customer collaboration to manage that onboarding where I have access to all that data and I can measure everything very effectively. You may not have that, but if you're going to break out onboarding, we're just staying with this as an example, you might need to assess what are the tools that you need to do that job. Maybe it's leveraging your CSP. Maybe it's leveraging, I don't know, Excel or Google Sheets. Now, while I don't love that so much in the sense that like I think it's difficult to scale that way, I do think it's important for you to start to think about what do you actually need to do the job, right? Sales always gets what they need. Marketing always gets what they need. It's time for us to advocate for our teams and our people and make sure that they have the technology that they need to do their jobs. Now, the other thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to identify where those gaps are, right? So if it's, we need a project management tool because you've got a very comprehensive implementation, right? Where it is real project management. We're not managing steps in a playbook or a success cycle. We are actually going through and we're having to project manage a specifically scoped project to get this customer stood up and deployed. You might need a project management tool. You might need collaboration software. You might need different things. So it's really important for you to go through your entire tech stack. Now, I'm going to give you a little pro tip here. I used to work for a company. We did SaaS apps management. And I will tell you, on average, I think every SaaS company has about 200 tools in their tech stack. Pro tip, go speak to someone in IT. Go speak to somebody who knows or has visibility into all the tools that you have available in your company. And I guarantee you, you'll find things that you didn't know that you had. And sometimes it's easier to add licenses to something that you have already and find creative ways to use it than it is to go and procure an entirely new piece of technology. So I will just tell you, I've done that a ton of times in different organizations. I'm like, oh, wow, okay, you have that. What does that do? They tell me what it does. And I'm like, okay, great. I go to their website, I go look at other use cases and workflows or things that it could do and find that I could creatively use this to do what I need it to do as well. Great. Guess what? $1,000 license cost is far less than asking for $25,000 to go buy a new platform. So if you don't have endless budgets, you've identified that there are certain gaps, get creative. And so I'm just telling you, there's probably other tools and technology in your tech stack at your company that you could probably use to your advantage. Now, if you do have a little money, go spend it and go do some research and go find the best in class technology to serve your needs. Do not go buy the best technology because everyone else has it. This isn't a pair of shoes. This isn't a bag. This is your technology. So figure out what your needs are specifically and buy a solution that will go and manage those gaps. All right. So I'm going to leave you there with tools and technology, but I will say the very last thing I will say, I do believe that Excel and Google Sheets, probably some of the most powerful software out there. So if you know how to use Excel very well, I'm sure that there's a ton you can do with it. All right. Now we do the skill set analysis. So we talked about this kind of like this two-part dichotomy of like skill and will. So we already talked about like resources as we think about what resourcing looks like. Now we've got to do this skill assessment. Now, this is kind of like the part 2 to the resources, but I kind of moved it down a little bit further in my step because I wanted to get to the place like resourcing was kind of telling me the number of people that I would need. And I kind of went down that little rabbit hole of like, let's talk to our team, make sure that we got the right people who want to do the right work. Because I think it's important to have those conversations. But now we're going to get to that point where it's like, okay, we know how many people we think we need to go do these things. We know what the technology is. We've defined and scoped all the stuff so far. What are the right skills for this role, right? If I have a very complex software, I might need somebody who's got high technical aptitude, who understands complexity of software or something, right? If they're going to be managing integrations, it's big project management. Maybe I need a project manager, right? I've worked in organizations where we had just PMs to manage implementation because there was so much, it was so heavy. So maybe you need a PM. Now, this is where it's important to go through that skill set analysis and actually assess everybody on your team, as well as what is it that you specifically need in the customer journey. Do not make the mistake of just saying, Mary's really great. I don't want to lose her. She knows a ton of stuff about our product and she knows a ton of stuff about our customers. And so we want to keep her. So Mary is the best fit for CSM role. That might not be the case. As you start to break down these roles, remember I talked to you, you're going to have expertise, you're going to have really defined focus around these roles. Guess what? Mary may have been good at everything optically, but when you ask Mary to just start to focus on certain things, does she really have the right skills to do that work? So I need you guys all to just spend some time making sure that you are doing that skill set assessment. Not only the skills required for each stage of the journey, but then going back to your team and saying, okay, great, based off of what I need, what does our team look like? Do the members of our organization, do they possess the necessary skills and expertise to be highly effective in this role? Not can they do this? Can they be highly effective? Are they going to be the difference in helping us get to the next stage? And again, the reality of it is sometimes that's a no. So Anyway, you're going to go do this skill assessment and analysis. Again, starting with what do we need for the role? And then what are the resources on our team? What skills do they have? Do they have the right skills to do this? Now, I talked about collaboration and communication being so key. I can't stress this enough, but everything that we do in customer success should be anchored on collaboration and communication. We're one of the few functions in the business that touches everything. We work with marketing, we work with sales, we work with product, we work with finance, we work with the executive leadership team, we work with engineering. There is no part of the organization that we do not touch. So when you're going through big changes like this, it is so critical to your success to make sure that you are collaborating effectively. So first, I would say start to understand, how does this change impact the work that we're doing with different departments, right? So if we're working with sales, guess what? Sales now isn't going to be handing off their prospects who are now customers to CSMs. Maybe it goes to an executive and the onboarding team. Maybe it goes to implementation, and we've got different people there. They also have to know how to talk about this, right? Setting expectations with prospects in the sales process. They're going to have to be able to explain and talk about, hey, this is what's going to happen once you become a customer. You're going to have these points of contact. You're going to go through onboarding, then you'll get your CSM, and then you're going to work with the renewals manager, whatever you design, but they need to be able to talk about it. Marketing needs to help you by creating collateral, and you're going to be working with them. And guess what? Marketing, now that you've broken the team out into specialty roles, they need to know, who am I going to if I need a reference? Who am I going to if I need a case study? Who am I going to if I need a speaker at an event, right? Or something like that. Or if I'm doing a product release, who is helping orchestrate that with me? There's a lot that we do in collaboration with marketing. We need to be very tight on all of this. Customer support. I kind of put customer support in the customer experience or success organization. So, but yes, they're going to need to know, because guess what? If they're getting support tickets and that customer is on onboarding, and now you have an onboarding manager, they're not any longer going to the CSM, right? So much changes when you break this out, and it's not bad, but if everyone doesn't understand what's happening and how it's happening and when it's happening, it's going to be chaos. So you've got to make sure that you're fostering strong communication and collaboration. And then you've got to figure out, how do you integrate these roles seamlessly? Because now it's like, again, we're not just creating a role and saying, okay, good luck, dropping it in. We now have a role that we have put into the business that has to be really well orchestrated for that customer lifecycle. It has to be seamless in how data and information is flowing from role to role. The roles have to be scoped. Everyone has to understand their swim lanes. Where do certain people start and stop? This is where RACI models. Big fan of a RACI model if you're making this shift. If you don't know what that is, happy to share a link to some examples there. But basically, it's a model that you're going to create that will help you understand who is responsible and accountable and consulted and informed across all the different stages and tasks and activities in a customer lifecycle. So you've got to make sure that you're integrating each of these functions strategically into the business, because you can't have a structure that's going to create friction for your employees or your customers. Okay, and then lastly here, pilot programs. Like I said, I think it's so critical to start out with a small tranche of customers, identify and say, like, again, if I'm going to use onboarding again as an example, is of course by no means is the only specialty role, but for the sake of this conversation, if we have an onboarding manager that we've now implemented, right? Start small. Say, guess what? You know what? Our next 3 customers who are coming in from sales, we're going to have them go through this experience where they go and work directly with an onboarding manager. Then they're going to go to their CSM. And we're just going to track that. And we're going to have conversations, and we're going to meet regularly about it. We're going to talk about what's working and what's not working and points of friction. And we're not going to wait until it's over and say it was a success or it's a failure. This is where it's like, we're going to start small and we're going to watch it every single step. We need to make sure that we are designing something that is going to be smooth and work effectively. Then you've got to gather feedback. I will tell you, one of my favorite things about being in the role that I am is being able to seek feedback from customers. While it is great to also work collaboratively with your teams and find out what's working, what's not, you need to be speaking with customers. And so typically when I do pilot programs like this, when it's going to change the experience for my customers, I'll tell them and say, hey, I hope, like, you know, we're trying something new here, right? We're rolling out a new onboarding specialty role. You're going to be a part of this. we'd love your feedback as we move through this program to make sure that you're having a great experience, that you're getting what you need, and that, this works. So start by setting expectations early so you can collect feedback early and often from your customers, because your team will obviously be working collaboratively with you, but we don't want your customers kind of sitting out there in a silo only at the end to say, how did that go? I'd rather them know that we are trying something new and we want them to be a part of this journey and part of our redesign of this. Bring your customers into the process. They love that. Okay, so we covered the 7 stages. Couple things I want to leave you with before we wrap up and get to some Q&A. I do see that there's about 14 or so questions in there. We're going to do our best to get to as many as possible, but a couple things I want to remind you. One, now might not be the right time. So sometimes what we want to do might not be the best time for the business. So this might be a strategy that you're like, great, I attended this webinar, I learned a bunch of stuff, hopefully. But it might not be the best time for you to be making these shifts. So I think it's important to really just assess that. Is this the appropriate thing for us to be doing right now? Because like I said, it depends. You might have a model right now that you're like, oh, I only dream to get to a space where a time where I can have specialty roles. You might need to wait on that. So just make sure it's the right time for the team, for the business, to make those shifts. 2, do your research and determine the best roles. I think it's easy to call out some of the easy ones. Like I mentioned, when I was talking through today's webinar, I talked about onboarding, I talked about renewal, I talked about implementation, right? Those are easy. It could also be like we want to implement professional services, right? It could be other things, but do your research and make sure these are the things that are going to have material impact on our business, right? By making these shifts and by making these changes, we're actually going to be able to scale. We'll be able to do more. If I found out that, my team having the CSMs carry 10 onboardings while they're still managing a full book of business is too much, it's taking too long. But if I add an onboarding manager, I can actually accelerate the onboarding time because I have that focus. I can get my customers up and running in 2 weeks versus 12 weeks. That could be very material to our customers, getting a lot of value, having a better experience, growing earlier with us, renewing with us for longer. So understand what roles are going to have the most impact to your business and your customers. Enable those new roles properly. Just because you've created a new role and the person that you put in this role has the right skills, you are now redesigning all of the programs around it. It's not just, let's just take what we had and now give it to this one person to manage. You need to redesign that, and you need to make sure that everyone knows how to do the work they're expected to do from beginning to end. They need to know what KPIs that they're responsible for. They need to have visibility into how they're impacting those KPIs. So it is so much more than just cutting off a piece of what your CSMs are doing today and saying this person will do this thing for all these customers. Please spend the time and enable your people properly. 4, I will continue to stress you need to get cross-functional buy-in. It is not enough for you guys to go and redesign this in a silo. You need to be working very strategically with all of your counterparts. You might actually have conversations with sales and find out that, guess what? Customers are a little annoyed because onboarding takes so long, but it could be a bandwidth thing, right? Or from a marketing standpoint, as they're interviewing customers just aren't getting as much value because they feel like they're not having enough strategic conversations throughout the life cycle of the partnership. So by talking to these other teams, not only could you be finding the right information that you need to make these decisions, but you could also be, obviously working with them to make sure that they're getting the best out of the customer base as well. And then lastly, I'll keep you with this, keep iterating. There is no one and done in anything, in any role, in any business. You design processes, they are continuously evolving. There's always room to make things better. And so please keep iterating. That doesn't mean every week rip out the rug from underneath all of your team members and then roll out a new process, but keep working to collect feedback from your customers, collect feedback from your team, iterate on things that aren't working. Things that are working, accelerate those, scale those, and keep doing what you can to make this process and this change work for everyone. Okay, with 6 minutes remaining, thank you guys for sticking with me through that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to go full picture here. I appreciate that there's been a lot of conversation in the chat, so thank you guys all so much for contributing to the conversation there. I am going to try and find where the Q&A is. There we go. And I'm going to try to get through a couple of these questions for you guys with the time that we have remaining. Okay, so first one here, Rena, How do you deal with your exec team having concerns about having too many cooks in the kitchen? Does it hurt the customer experience if we have too many handoffs? And how do you recommend managing it? That's a great question. And I hear that from a lot of folks. I think it's easy to say customers only want a single point of contact because sometimes we make assumptions. One of the things that I did as I was considering what changes I was going to make is I actually interviewed my customers and I asked them, what are the things that they would need? And I kind of walked them through the programs that I was working on designing. And not one of my customers that I interviewed said, actually, I'd rather just have one point of contact. I don't want any of these specialty roles. I don't want all these programs you're talking about. My value is having one single point of contact. So my advice to you there is when you have execs that are pushing back on something, find ways to validate what points are that you're making, right? And I think the best way to do that is when we're designing things for our customers, ask our customers. So do some research, do some feedback, send out a survey, collect some information about them. Now, as far as the handoffs, listen, it's up to you to make that a seamless experience. This is where it's like I'm big on having a centralized repository for all customer information. If you have a customer success management platform, or if you've got a CRM, or if you've got some other place where you store all of your customer information, make sure that everyone has access to it. The worst thing that you can do is silo your data. I am huge on data democratization. If you can make sure that everyone not only has access to data, but is empowered to use it and they're trained and enabled on how to use it, that way those handoffs should be frictionless. You should never be coming to a conversation having to ask your customer to have the same conversation they've had 4 times. If I'm a CSM picking up a customer who's coming out of onboarding, I should know everything that happened in onboarding. I should know exactly where they are in their deployment, what they need to work on, what came up as challenges for them, opportunities, what they were most excited about. I should have all that context. And when I introduce myself to the customer, I should be bringing all of that context to the discussion to start to really foster that trust with my customer, right? And let them know, hey, I already have all this visibility. I have all this context. I'm ready to hit the ground running. Like, let's go. So my feedback to you there is collect some information, use data to squash any concerns if you think that people are really concerned about that, and then just focus on creating good, seamless experiences for your customers by not having disjointed handoffs. Okay, let's see. We'll get to another one. Do you have any advice on how to ensure clients have a smooth experience when working with CSMs in different specialty roles? Okay, so I think this one, similar to the one before, right? If you've got multiple people in the partnership, if they are not working kind of in a linear model, so like onboarding to CSM is very clear. But if you've got an instance where you've got a CSM, but then you also have an account manager, right? Sometimes those roles can get a little fuzzy. And this is where I go back to, I think it's important to have a RACI model where clear lines of roles and responsibilities are drawn for all team members so people know who is responsible for doing what and how. The worst thing you can do is pit 2 team members against each other because you have too much ambiguity. So my advice to you is, like, if you're going to have specialty roles and they're going to work in collaboration with the CSM, facilitate a model that fosters collaboration. I'm a big advocate of a pod model. My team right now isn't big enough, doesn't warrant it. But when I did have larger teams, one of the things I love to do when we got to a size where we were scaling and we were creating lots of specialty roles, we created pods. And those pods we had a professional services person, we had an account manager, we had a CSM, and I forget what the 4th role was. It was another specialty role. But all 4 of those people worked together on the same book of business. And so it was so collaborative. It was so thoughtful on how we approach the business and our customers always know who to go to for what. So again, that model may or may not work depending on your customers, your product, the spend, all of those things. So it's important to understand what works for you guys. But I think the most important thing for your customers is just to try to create seamless experiences by making sure that knowledge is being shared throughout the organization. Would you suggest, another question here, would you suggest full stack or specialty role for early stage? I think I mentioned this when I was defining the 2. So early in the webinar, I said, usually if you're starting your early stage company, let's just say you've got your first 50 or less customers, you should be full stack. You don't have a need for specialty at that moment. Now, again, I'm generalizing that statement. If you've got a very, very, very heavy deployment, right? Like I always say, like, is it Salesforce or is it Calendly? Like, what are we working with here? If it's Salesforce and you're basically designing and really customizing software on a blank sheet of paper, maybe it makes sense to have an implementation manager day one. And so there's certain specialty roles that you should be creating. Go ahead and do that. But for all intents and purposes, if you don't have something that is overly complex and your CSM can handle that, I'd recommend starting with a full stack and then starting to figure out over time what makes sense to break out, or else you might be making early assumptions. So that said, it is 2 o'clock on the dot, and I don't want to run over. There are a lot of great questions here. I'll probably take some of these questions and maybe answer them over LinkedIn. I'll put a post up and maybe address some of the ones that are open that aren't duplicative. But just want to thank you all so much for coming and joining me today. We will be back here next Tuesday, same time, same place, new topic. So again, thank you. We'll be sending out the recording shortly. Appreciate it, and I'll see you guys all again next week. Thank you, guys.